Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I didn't need that.
No.
Okay. I'm Nancy Phillips, and yeah, I used to work. I'm an ordained pastor, but I also worked for a long time as a psychotherapist. So I'm not here today to talk about all the ins and outs of diagnostic things around mental health issues, but just to talk a little more generally about how we might look at mental health and the stigma that surrounds it, how we can be helpful to each other in navigating issues that sometimes we felt like we had to just, handle on our own and not share with other people. So that's basically what I'd like to talk about today. And also touch on the way in which mental health issues are sometimes actually health and illness issues, and how they are sometimes a little bit more spiritual issues. They aren't always something to see a doctor about. Sometimes they are. But they aren't always, and they're a part of what makes us human. So a quote that I've always loved, although when I went back to look for it, it turned out that I had remembered it just a little bit incorrectly. But there was a psychiatrist named Harry Stack Sullivan, and his quote is actually, "All of us are much more human than otherwise." So we're just people. And what I had thought his quote was turned out to be part of a poem by Maya Angelou. And her quote is, "We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike." So I think it's always really huge to think about how similar we really are. So why do mental health issues seem a little bit weird, or something that's always had this kind of hush-hush quality to them? When I think back on my own life, I recall a time in my 20s when I was going through a fairly major episode of depression. And my mother really wanted to help. But she was raised in a generation where things like psychiatrists they just weren't something that normal people associated with. Maybe some of the rest of you have come from a background like that. She said, if I really, really needed to talk to a psychiatrist, then yeah, I guess we could figure out a way to do that. But it was clear that it felt very uncomfortable to her, and that really it would be a whole lot better if I just improved on my own. And I think in the church, we seem to strengthen that kind of stigma, in the sense that we think if we are good Christians, if we are walking the right walk with God, we shouldn't be down. We shouldn't be paying a whole lot of, I think sometimes in my family, it was almost considered selfish to pay way too much attention to yourself and your own emotions. You should just get along and be putting your energy out there helping other people and not focusing on yourself. So I think in the church, we sometimes add to the stigma, which I think is there in society anyway. I don't think this starts with the church. Maybe it starts through all the history of mental illness, when people used to be put in sanitariums that were pretty darn awful and probably provoked as much bad kind of crazy acting out, almost because it was expected in that situation. So maybe it's a hangover of associating any kind of mental health has to do with what we fear as being sort of crazy. Maybe it just has to do with, the idea that we should be successful as Christians and always have the good smile and the calm and happy countenance, and not get too scared, because after all, God is with you. Why would you why would you have a panic attack when you're, when you certainly have Jesus to hold your hand? I mean, I think we get some kind of squirrely beliefs around all of that. So when I went to the NAMI walk last Saturday, and that's the first one of those that I had participated in, and a lot of the booths were from big insurance companies and things like that. But one of the things they all proclaimed was, let's get rid of the stigma around mental health. And surely we talk about mental health so much more easily than we used to. And I would expect in this church, this is a fairly open community, I doubt that there's as much, kind of hiding and holding on tight to these issues as there might be in certain other places. But nevertheless, society as a large does still believe there's a stigma, it's still something that's easier to have a rational opinion about than to talk about it as it touches you yourself. So I'm not trying to touch on all kinds of mental health issues in our short time today. I thought I'd talk a little bit about depression and anxiety, which goodness knows they're emotions that are common to all of us in everyday life. And they also get triggered in a whole lot of stressful situations and other kinds of just difficult times in life. Our anxiety and our depression might kick in. But if you look at them, what are they basically? They're feelings that are rooted in our bodies. So you take depression, for example. It does seem to be related to usually a slowing down, feeling of heaviness, a feeling of tiredness, and a desire to sleep, almost to hibernate, loss of energy. If there's sorrow and loss involved, it can manifest as, tight stomach and feeling overwhelmed occasionally by tears. Sometimes depression can kind of go the other way and people get agitated, has some more anxiety mixed into it. But the sort of prototypical depression is slowing down, your body slows down. So when do we do that normally without calling it a mental illness? We do it normally whenever we're sad. Life has plenty of things to be sad about. We do it in times of mourning, when someone has died. I expect there'll be some mourning as Richard is leaving the congregation. There are a lot of times when we might feel sorrow, and if you read, for instance, the Psalms, you hear a lot of psalmists crying out, feeling alone and isolated. They're not walking around saying, "Oh, I'm just, happy all day." They, a lot of them talk about feeling sorrow and being cut off. You look at the history of mystics in the Christian church, a lot of them talked about having periods that they referred to as a dark night of the soul, when they just felt dry on the inside, like no matter what their amount of praying, no matter how much they tried to work on a spiritual life or a prayer life, there was just nothing really joyful or maybe happy and joyful aren't even the right words, just nothing productive seemed to be happening. They didn't feel that they were really connecting with God at points. So there are all kinds of times when we might feel depression in life, and it's not always something to go and get help with. On the other hand, I like to think of, having maps of how we organize our life, and sometimes we organize it in terms of issues of spirituality, or sometimes in terms of life events, but sometimes in terms of illness. And there's no reason to throw out any one of those ways of looking at life. It's more like they can blend together, or sometimes you need to move from one to the other. You look at something like anxiety, again, absolutely normal. Nobody doesn't have anxiety, or if they do, somehow lack it. Life can be kind of dangerous if you lack the warning signs. And physically, basically what's going on is adrenaline is getting kicked in, and your body is revving up, getting tense, ready for action. If your heart is pounding faster, kind of very different from the sluggishness that you might feel with many types of depression. But you are geared up, you're looking for, where's the danger coming from? It's got to be coming from somewhere, but where? And you need that. You don't want to be crossing the street without some sense that there are cars coming down the road. You don't want to be careless around a fire. You might be in some area where people are hostile to you. You pay attention. So anxiety really has the usefulness of alerting us to when things might be just a little off, or a little dangerous, or a little not right, or maybe it alerts us to something that feels really unjust in our lives, or something that we need to face, or maybe it alerts us to the fact that we're about to behave in some way that maybe is not going to have a really good consequence. The worry that we feel is kind of a nudge, like, really? Is this what you want to do? So it's very helpful, but just like depression, of course, there are times when you need to look at it in a different way. Sometimes you can think about, anxiety is having to do with just the existential dread of being a very small creature with God so big and we're so small. It's not because God is hostile to us, it's just the world is massive. I think Job felt something like that when he finally came to grips that he wasn't the center of anything, and it's just, after all, a very puny creature in the face of a gigantic creation. The sorrow sometimes comes, combined with guilt, and sometimes there's a reason for guilt. There's, in our own spiritual lives, there are times when we've done things that we need to atone for or have put right. So, useful bodily emotions hooked into everyday behavior, and with a lot of resonance for spirituality in our spiritual lives. So when do they become a real issue? I always like to think that they become an issue mostly when we are overwhelmed by them. When it's one thing to be really down for a while, it's another to feel like you've been down so long, you just don't know how you're coming back up again. Depression often involves anger, which could be turned outward toward other people who somehow have let you down, but sometimes gets turned in on yourself. You're angry at yourself for not being enough, not being good enough, not being all kinds of things. And that anger, sometimes for people leads to a point of saying, boy, everybody else would be better off without me. I'm a drag on everyone. Their lives would be a whole lot nicer if I simply weren't here with all my issues. And the next thing you know, a person can be heading more directly towards suicide. just starts with those feelings of, I'm in the way, I'm not doing what I need to do. So, depression it can be triggered by, for many people, by the change of seasons. You know, it is a lot like hibernation for animals. We can get down when the sunlight disappears. We need sunlight. The sluggishness of hibernating for the winter can also be a real mood disorder. When does it need to be treated? When it's overwhelming. When you find that you can't do any of your daily activities or relationships with people, when you find that you're avoiding more and more, when you're dropping out of this and not showing up for that, when you can't cope with an everyday life, although some people get very skilled at separating out their emotional life from perhaps their a professional life. We've heard of people out in public who put on a good face of being okay, and being successful, being huge in the eyes of the world, and you know, back at home they're feeling suicidal and sometimes carry through. So sometimes depression keeps you from functioning. Other times you strive harder to function when the spotlight's on you, and then once the spotlight is off, you kind of crumble. So at times we need to say this is beyond the normal, it's beyond, you know, a spiritual kind of thing. It has places in it that are really needing of help. We don't have perfect medications at this point in our understanding of depression and anxiety. We have good medications. We have much better medications than we ever used to in the history of the world. They keep, you know, maybe not every single year getting better, but from time to time there's another jump up, and the meds get better than they were. I was reading a long article recently about anorexia and how it seems to function very differently from other kinds of anxiety, so that the very medications that might help with anxiety, in fact, don't even really touch anorexia, possibly because the body isn't metabolizing things very well once too much weight has been lost. So medications aren't perfect, but they're certainly there, they're certainly usable, and for some people they're extremely, extremely helpful. Like really the difference between functioning and not functioning. So medications are good. Therapy is good. Sometimes it's just the process of talking to somebody else. I mean, all sorts of studies have been run about which types of therapy are the best and which aren't, and the jury's kind of out there. It depends so much on the people involved and how you measure progress, and often people do well with sort of a combination of some medication and some relationship with a therapist. And what do you do with a therapist? Well, you can do anything from looking at specific kinds of behaviors and trying to learn how to change them, or you might be looking at your thoughts in cognitive approaches to psychotherapy. You're looking at the messages you give yourself. Oh, I always screw things up. I always do stuff like that wrong. People are really upset with me. People don't like the fact that I always mess up. These are messages that run through our heads that when you challenge them, you might find, no, you don't always mess up. And really other people are not so upset with you. And So just challenging the beliefs that you have inside your head is something that a therapist can help with. Sometimes it's as simple as talking and being accepted for who you are and what you are. And it, rather than any particular thing the therapist has taught you, it all comes out of a relationship of being absolutely accepted where you are and as who you are without any shock and you did what? Sometimes people do best in groups, therapy groups, simply because then you meet a lot of other people who are going through the same thing that you are. So there are lots of ways to look at this. Now, I said earlier, we're all more alike than that. We're certainly all more alike than not when it comes to what are functions of anxiety and sorrow or depression in our lives. That just comes along with being a human being. We have all that. But when we suffer, then maybe you can also say, yes, we are all alike, but yes, at the same time, we are each very unique and particular. So that what really gets to me may well not really get to you. One of us might be prey to recurring bouts of depression. Somebody else may go through life never feeling a grief that really saps them all that much. Some people may have phobias of minor things like spiders, which they don't usually encounter in their everyday life. But other people have really paralyzing fear of public speaking, say, or being in an open space out in the marketplace is the translation of the Greek word. Just being out and about. Some people have to make sure they're not in big, sort of scary, empty places or very dark places. Fear can take all kinds of forms, and both in the types of fear and how badly we are hit by these fears. They're all very unique. So I like to look at things from two sides at once. We're all alike, we're all unique, and somehow they don't contradict each other. They're absolutely one and the same thing. You could say, when you're talking about mental health stigma, that in many ways we have learned to separate the body and the mind, and we think of the mind as having to do with our personality or our spirituality, and we think of the body as being our arms and legs and our hearts and lungs and our digestion, when in reality our brains are just as much an organ and a part of our physical being as anything else. But because they feel so central to who we are as a person, it makes it scarier when we think something's wrong with our emotional life. Makes it feel more like it's somehow tearing down or pointing to flaws in who we really are as people. But in fact, we tend to inherit a lot of these tendencies, whether it's neurodiversity, as people talk about now, with people with ADHD or, other autism, other types of processing issues. It's purely a physical glitch. It might run through a family. It might show up just in one person, but it's not something a person's responsible for. In the same way, different families tend towards maybe running into issues with with anxiety or depression, just based on physiological things, sensitivity, how much they pick up on or get startled by external stimuli. There are all kinds of things that really, when you look at it, hasn't anything to do with the quality of the person as a person. It has only to do with physical things. The brain is physical. The emotions, as I said earlier, are absolutely physical. There's nothing just in your head about them. So, what do we do as a church community? And I think that's a piece of what's important to think about, particularly in a church where, I get the sense that most of you work pretty hard at friendships with other people, supporting other people. So what helps or doesn't help when you have a friend who's really kind of going downhill in some ways, or when you yourself are? I mean, it doesn't have to be your friend who's having a hard time, but maybe you yourself are. It's really okay to talk about the tough subjects. One of the booths I saw at the NAMI walk was about suicide and the feelings of people who are left after a suicide. Since suicide is typically a very hard thing to process for the family, for anybody who's left behind, whether you were super close or a little more on the periphery. A person's suicide really does a number on your sense of, did I do enough? Was I a good enough friend? Was I a good enough family member? What did I miss? Is it my fault? Did I make them feel worse? I mean, questions are endless. So I noticed a booth and talked to some of the people there who are working on a new treatment modality for people who are family members of a suicide, where they can chart out a storyboard having to do with their relationship with the person, the internal feelings that got triggered. Because that's a huge piece that people need help processing. But things like suicide can be talked about. There are hotlines. When I was practicing back in the past, we were always told to call 911 for crisis, but NAMI is putting out this 988 number that many of you may know about already. It's specifically for help with mental health crises. If you or somebody else is suicidal, if somebody is sort of way out of control, and you just don't know what to do and you need help quickly, apparently that will get you talking to somebody who specifically deals with mental health issues. But not every case of depression or anxiety leads towards suicide. Sometimes it's more that you just see that somebody's not thriving. So what do you talk about with them? Well, you don't minimize, what they're going through. It's really not that bad. Take it easy, you'll be fine tomorrow. Don't compare. Oh yeah, that used to bother me, but I've gotten over it, or this is what I did, this is what you need to do. You don't need to compare your experiences. You don't need to top their experiences with your experience, of course, but not minimize it. And people generally don't need to be told what to do. It's better if you're in the position of asking how you can help. To make suggestions always, if it seems like somebody would benefit from talking to a therapist or someone, you can suggest it. but you can't step in and run somebody's life. You certainly can't force them to do things. One way to look at it, if you are suggesting therapy, too often I hear of people bickering at each other, like perhaps in a marriage that's falling apart. You really need therapy. I need therapy. You really need therapy. Now, what really needs therapy is the relationship. But too often people end up bickering about who needs it. Like, you're the problem, you get therapy. No, you're the problem, you get therapy. As though it's an evaluation of who's okay and who's not okay. When really, maybe a better approach is to say to yourself and to others, we all deserve help. It's not that we need help because we're a mess. You know, you're really falling apart, you go get therapy. It's more that when things are tough, we deserve to treat each other well. And other people deserve to treat themselves well. And treating yourself well means if there's help available, you deserve a chance to access it, because it may do wonders. So it's not who needs, it's we all deserve. And then letting people know how much they matter to you. People often feel, you know, when they're isolated in depression, when they're too fearful to participate in things, they begin to feel, I don't matter to anybody. I mean, the truth is that maybe they've taken themselves out of the arena of, you know, it's not that other people shun them, they kind of isolated, but nevertheless, the feeling they're left with is nobody cares whether I'm there or not. Nobody ever sees me, and nobody ever saw me when I kind of disappeared. People need to know that they matter to you, that they're important. And then I like the idea of inviting people to do things with you. Again, not preaching at them. You really need to go take a walk. That'll help you. Or, boy, if you could really get out of yourself if you would just go volunteer somewhere and do something useful. That doesn't usually make people feel super good. It's usually not very helpful. But if you yourself are doing something that's fun, that's helpful, that's maybe volunteer stuff, keep those invitations coming. You can't drag them in, but if you invite enough, you may bring them into something you're doing that ends up being, you know, really kind of what they needed. So those are the main things I wanted to kind of lay out there. And then I'd really like to just get other people's thoughts and feelings and reflections about. Yeah.
I have a friend whose daughter has been promoting CBD through a company. It's a hemp product that does not have the
Not THC, but CBD. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And she says that she has been taking a small amount of something in the morning and in the evening.
Yeah.
And she has weaned herself off of the anxiety medication that she had been taking. So it's anxiety, not depression.
Yeah. And
she is a retired medical technologist, very educated, thoughtful person. So I'm interested in knowing more about that and plan to do some research on it, not for myself, but for a relative that is has anxiety issues that I'm concerned about.
Boy, I think the jury is really out on that. I don't think there has been a really well conducted study on that. And a lot of people swear by CBD products for a variety of things, not just mental health,
Yes,
but for,
right.
you know, pains here and there, or their
Inflammation.
digestion.
Right.
Marijuana is supposed to help with glaucoma. There are many things out there. Actually, I think it does help with glaucoma. I think that may be one of the ones that they've proved. The rest, I think, is sort of people passing on their experiences and maybe small scale studies. But I have not heard about a study that's really pinned down that issue. So if through hearsay it helps someone, yeah, I'd encourage you to keep reading what you can about it, because I also don't know that it's been absolutely cleared in terms of ill effects. Do all your reading, and yeah, I don't know if there's anything more definitive.
I have 5 kids, and all of which display various things, anxiety and depression and stuff. And I have children who are in the medical field. I have children that are in the Army, and, various times that mental health issues have come up, they really hit the snag on being in their profession, the ability to be honest about how they are coping with their life at any particular time. For fear of compromising their career, well, not in the big scope of their career, but their positions.
Sure.
And I don't know, I suppose as so many different things are, the climate is changing on it, but I just know, like, even in the last 5 years, 2 of my kids, because of the positions that they hold, were slow, and I think one of them didn't take the step to speak out honestly about something, you know, things that were going on with themselves. One of my kids in the medical field, my daughter in Australia, when I was speaking with her one time, she has debilitating anxiety that just doesn't allow her to, she's an ICU nurse. But I likened it to, you wouldn't criticize the diabetic of taking their insulin. It's just the way, you know, the way their chemistry in their body works is that they've got this element that is, they need a boost. And she is someone that has addressed her anxiety and finds her life. That was a step in the right direction. She also lives in Australia, so I don't know that there was the stigma. But I think that's a real.
But she was hesitant at first to say anything because she thought, as a nurse, she should be above
something about
board.
insulin and diabetics and insulin.
Yeah.
And an anxious person being, and I can't remember the name of, it's an M medicine that, like the same thing that ADHD kids take. I have a grandson who has ADHD, who's medicated for that as well. And it's the same medicine. She takes the same medicine my grandson takes. But just at the workplace, there were legitimate reasons why they were really nervous about being honest about their mental health status. Yeah, that was, and you know, what do you say?
Yeah, other than and that's one of those places where the stigma hangs on. What's that?
I said, as a mother, you want to say, just take care of yourself. Absolutely, say something, but, I mean, take care of yourself. Be proactive and do something, and yet the reality, you know, my other kids are saying, you know, they've got something there. But what they're anxious about, what they're worried about might happen, that's legitimate, you know, anyhow.
Yeah, so that's a good real life example of, yeah, sometimes in what we consider responsible positions, we're even quicker to say, well, we don't believe in the stigma, but if you're in that position, what if those drugs make you do something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you be trusted in your position?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's scary to feel that people are maybe questioning you along those lines.
Yeah, and it actually caused a couple of my kids to hesitate, I think one to not take a step forward, yeah.
Yeah.
And they definitely talk about a family thing, they look at me and say, thanks, Mom. I've treated myself, I've been in, you know, in times, for depressive, I think, you know, I've taken antidepressants at times, and so. I got this guy, just have things, Mom, you know.
Yeah, if you,
My side of the gene.
yeah, if you look back through your family, I mean, yeah, things run in families,
Yeah.
whether it's mental health or other kinds and. Yeah, kids may not applaud that they, that they got it passed on to them, but that's life.
It seems to me that if we could get out of the way of saying mental health and just say health. You know, then, I mean, you know, then we could
Take away that line.
take away that it's a mental health issue, it's a health issue.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
and our insurance structure is
Mhm.
such that you get so much mental health and you get so much physical health or whatever, you know, and you
Yeah.
just say, well, you know, it's just, why don't we just call it health?
Uh-huh.
Anyway, but it's, I don't know, generations, I don't know if we'll ever get there, but.
And that goes along, yeah, with that idea that somehow when
It's
it
your
has
fault.
to do with the brain, it's really
It's your
more about
fault.
your personality, but you're not enough. You're not
strong
strong enough.
Yes.
Yes, you're not optimistic enough.
Yeah.
I was just, as sort of an aside, is something I read in the New York Times is a lot of the dating sites, in some of those places like New York, people are beginning to list their mental health
Issues?
and it's become a positive attractant that, oh, I'm managing myself. So it's such to the point that some people are lying about that they're dealing with their mental. It's just,
my
I thought you would think that was funny, but as to looking at the whole body, if most people realized that your neurotransmitters, which are what makes you feel all these other things, the serotonin, the dopamine, everything is made in your gut. And so if your gut's not working, it can affect your health. If you have that gut feeling, it's down there. And
The queasiness and
Right.
just on that.
and my spouse is, was suicidal and depressed, for probably most of you have heard me talk about that. And was thrown on antidepressants to stop him from going over the edge. And you know what it's like for a lot of people describe, it dulls everything. It dulls your life. And he hated being on them, but we were like, we don't know. I was on pins and needles, like what would happen if you didn't, because the mood swings were everywhere. But we did find somebody who actually treated his neurotransmitters. That is, you know, we've gone through Western medicine to give up and saying that this is just the way it is and these are the meds you're on. Good luck, you know, just stick with the program. But I couldn't, you know, couldn't see going on like this because, you know, usually happens with antidepressants. They give you a higher and higher amount because your body, it basically stops the cycle of you making serotonin. And it interferes with you being able to say, I need more or I need less. It interferes with that cycle. So the person that we went to eventually, he had already been treated for all of his, his major allergy of gluten, which also affected his anxiety. Three things: anxiety, depression, and memory. He was off of gluten and that improved, but he was still having, you know, some depressive bouts. And it's very hard nobody gets off of antidepressants. There's not a psychiatrist who's really trained to get you off antidepressants. It's either culture, at least the ones I've met. And
Yeah, and I would just like to,
sure,
inject, because I know you go to the food thing, which is another map. It's another map. It's another way to look at our bodies. You can center it on what's happening in your gut and what foods you
Right.
ingest.
it's a different thing. It's just one part of the story.
It's a part, so I would just sort of caution.
Right.
The meds aren't perfect, but the meds aren't all.
Right.
The food map really works for some people, and you can spend a lot of time had a sister chasing a lot of food service.
Right, but
So we don't have CDD
Right,
perfect answers,
but he
but I
was-
would agree, gut is one of them.
right, but he was getting labs monthly as to know what his neurotransmitters were and what needed to be treated. He was being treated on a more scientific level to figure out the supplements and then building him up. And the psychiatrist worked with him. And you never hear of a psychiatrist talking to a chiropractor, but they worked with him until he eventually got off of everything.
Wow.
But he had to fix the other things going wrong with him. And he's still not all mentally there, but he is off his antidepressants and he's like 70% there, which is a lot better than walking on pins and needles. He's actually smiling again. He's actually enjoying things again.
And it sounds like for him, the antidepressants maybe did not help, but I would like
Oh,
to just
they
put out there
did.
for
They
everybody.
did.
Oh, okay, they did, but you saw bad.
Well, it wasn't making him
I just
well.
don't, yeah, I just don't want to put a
Mhm.
story out there that nobody gets good results.
No, it's not that. I think,
Yeah,
I
I think we
think
differ in
pharmaceuticals
results.
have their place in every functional medicine person I've ever known.
Yeah,
Say they have their place. But judicially, most of the allopathic people don't know how to deal with it as a whole system.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a GP that knows how to do it, you can't say, please give me this because they haven't been trained.
yeah.
You know, so you.
So it's just, it's a helpful other piece that if people wish, kind of like you wishing to figure out what CBD does and doesn't help with. I think we are on sort of a frontier of, my sister who gets very much into the food stuff. Some of it I think, she's off on a weird track. And then again, some of it sounds, probably like there's a lot of truth in it.
Well,
I
most of
think
it's
we
been
don't
clinically
have the
trialed.
whole story. It's worth investigating.
Right, but a lot of it's been clinically trialed right now.
Okay. So
And as a scientist, I'm very careful about what I was
Yeah.
throwing into my spouse. Because I had to justify it to his GP who didn't know anything about this. I had to justify it to his psychiatrist. And it took him to know me for 3 to 5 years before he began to trust that I was doing the research. Because I also always looked at, all these people say it doesn't work, so I wanted to know why. I always go, you have to play devil's advocate and say, this sounds too good to be true. But if some of them actually go, oh, or the arguments they're giving are off, because I'm looking at the anti-aging. I haven't gone into CBD. But again, that's something to weigh.
Mhm.
It's not no harm, no foul. It's like, where on the body does it put you?
So in the case of you and your spouse, part of how you helped was taking a very active role in looking at different types of treatments. How else might we help each other how does a church community create an atmosphere that's helpful for people to be able to manage crises in terms of their emotional life? Any thoughts on that? What does family do as a group? Yeah,
You and I were just talking the other day that loneliness has been identified as a huge mental health problem across America. And loneliness is something that we can do as a church. I mean, we can befriend anybody that looks like they're new on a particular Sunday, or anybody that's, we get hints, and to me, that's a real obvious starting point that pay attention to people on the outside.
And we all are assigned to groups through a deacon. Not everybody has a personal relationship with their deacon, but that person is there to
okay.
hear about issues that you have, and
So maybe that needs to be brought to
it's,
fore a little bit more, if in fact there is that kind of.
It depends on the deacon, how
yes,
involved they want to be.
Yeah,
Their skill level.
Yes, yes. I mean, some deacons go above and beyond. You hear from them all the time. Others, maybe once a year. That's just the way it is. I know that Valley doesn't have any counseling in terms of depression or anxiety. I think they send you down to Westminster downtown.
That recently closed.
Pardon me?
That's closed now.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
so.
Oh dear. Yeah. So I don't know, about that.
Yeah, yeah.
I like David's and Jan's idea about trying to, because Jay is, what do you want? Not the fellowship, your membership or something, what's your called?
Growth.
Church Growth. Jay's on Church Growth. Okay, yeah. You know, so Jay and I have a lot of conversations, and, post-COVID, if we are post-COVID, which we kind of are, and people are coming back. You know, is it a goal to get more people back physically, or is it a goal to still administer online and do both, and one of our ideas was, kind of sorry, but I don't know who my deacon is. But we were thinking of doing trying to do some kind of a survey, and could the deacons do the survey of their people? We could organize that, and address not only, do you want to come back to church? Do you value that idea of coming back physically? Or do you need more contact? For us, we want to be here physically. We value that. Anyway, I don't want to put that a value on people who don't show up, right? But still, it's the
But
idea.
you're suggesting there might be some people out there that are feeling lonely in the wake of having stopped coming and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Momentum.
And could we somehow use deacons to do some, a personal type of an inventory, do physical inventories, and,
Mhm.
people do and don't, but, and then maybe find out is there's people out there that are all alone. There's living just one person in a household.
Yeah.
To me, that sounds pretty alone.
And I just think,
Yep.
and I think that just tracking and reaching out. I mean, there's some periods where I just haven't come, I was too depressed to come in. And I was also feeling a bit shameful that I had these problems, which most of my close friends were like tired of hearing about, because it was overwhelming for me. I couldn't talk about anything else. And I got to the point where I didn't say a lot of things because I was too afraid of chasing everybody off, because, so yeah, I think if somebody's actually, even if you get that response of, no, everything's fine, I'll just be where I am, just knowing that the church is reaching out, at least it's an anchor point for whoever's out there, and then if we even knew internally as a church, these people say they belong, does anybody actually here know what's going on in their lives? Do they actually need more than is their silence actually asking for somebody to check in on them? That's if we want to really know what's going on with the individuals in our congregation.
I think we have a pretty good concept of our homebound people. Do you agree, Sheila?
I think there's room for improvement. That's
Yeah,
what I will
okay.
say. I will say, speaking about deacons and listening and, there is room for some great improvement with our board of deacons. In years past, I hate to say prior to COVID, but that's what I'm gonna say now. Prior to COVID, we usually had a chairperson, the head of the deacons, that was just another deacon, but who kind of helped with whoever the pastor or staff person was who was assigned to the board of deacons, kind of check in with all the other deacons and make sure that they knew who their care circle was, and to make sure that the folks on the care circle knew vice versa, right? Who's who. And I think that COVID kind of disrupted that whole system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that system has not been
Picked up.
revived. And so we have deacons appointed, yes, but are they being counseled on how to be good deacons? and checked in with on a regular basis? I don't think so. And, you know, moving forward, especially during this time of transition, like for me, that would be, you know, something that is very important that Richard and I address on his departure, is that, you know, our deacons are set up for success. And that, you know, the whole congregation knows that. And it's really time for whoever's on the board of deacons to step up into their role. And if they're not really feeling like they can do that, then, you know, maybe we have to explore, you know, letting somebody, switch off and bringing in somebody new. Because, you know, we can't just look at the board of deacons as, you know, well, once a year I send a birthday card. Because it really needs to be a lot more than that. You know, and it needs to be a lot more than that. It doesn't have to be best friends, but it needs to be, you know, you should definitely know where your deacon is. And you should definitely like had some kind of FaceTime or phone time with them at some point in the 4 years that or 3 years that they're appointed your deacon. And, yeah.
But I think that if we're looking at a church community and, you know, health, physical health even too, you know, maybe Nancy's right, maybe that would be a point of contact, you know. This Nancy.
Yeah.
Do they have a person as a chairperson?
They don't, so that's what I mean, that kind of fell off. So, you know, we had a really strong chairperson for a number of years. And that person rolled off after a long time. And somebody else came on, very caring, loving individual. But maybe that's not their forte, is the organization, the organizing of folks.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then pandemic, and then,
Yeah, we have,
you know,
yeah, we just kind of,
out of sight, out of mind,
Yeah.
kind of, I hate to say, but, so, you know, it is definitely an area of the church climate that is not, that I feel really okay saying it's not the best that it could be.
Well, yes, Richards don't attend.
I don't think they get together. Like, so, I mean, it's kind of like and this is a whole nother thing, but I was just talking to somebody else about just our committees even, our individual session.
Yeah.
So we have our session meeting that's good, they're meeting. But sometimes those like subcommittees are not gathering as the big group that they used to gather. And I'll call out my education team, right? Education used to all sit down once a month on the same time, every single month. Even when we didn't have much to talk about, we still gathered on that time because it was our designated time and day to sit down. Then COVID happened and that just kind of fizzled. We started doing an email chat, you know, and bouncing things back and forth that way. We weren't sitting down. And so, you know, again, it's one of those things that, especially during this transition, that, you know, I have a list of things that I've started this week, right? It's on my list. Deacons, we need to get this. This needs to be solid during the transition. And, you know, committees need to be solid. You know.
I can recall when I was a deacon, and this was quite a while ago. The minister, Richard came, we had a chairperson that went out in the deacon room and said, who did you help this week, or I'm talking, you have a concern about anybody in under your supervision. It was well thought out and really was well done.
Yeah. There's lots of ways to do it, and then the fact that we just need to do something. So it's, because it could be a very good resource, right? You mentioned about the counseling thing. I mean, a deacon is not going to solve your problems. A deacon is not going to solve your problems.
No.
A pastor or pastoral counseling is not intended to solve your problem, right? But it is that first contact, the point of first contact sometimes for people to be able to call their deacon and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this thing right now. And you listen, oh, have you talked to one of the pastors about this? Yeah, okay. Then you call the pastor and, you know, that maybe that deacon says, I will help you call that pastor.
Yeah.
And be a liaison to help you get connected. And then you have that first meeting with pastor who then says, you know, I'm gonna be praying about you, you know, about this for you and all that. We'll check in from time to time, but yeah, let's get you hooked up with an actual doctor, an actual counselor, someone who specializes. Because, you know, counselors usually are not also licensed therapists.
No.
Very few and far between are. Most of us have just a little bit of pastoral counseling training to help, you know, determine kind of next steps and.
And so kind of bringing it, kind of wrapping these threads together, you brought up loneliness, David, and then that we talked about people that aren't here as one particular group. There are always the people that are here right in your midst and maybe feeling lonely. And then from time to time, the actual church structures, they function for a while. You know, any system tends to kind of fall apart over time. From time to time, you need to go back, and maybe this is one of those occasions when you say, how are we helping people to make sure nobody's falling? You know, if you're sitting home feeling really depressed and like you don't think you want to bother people with it, who's checking in with you? You know, who's making a point of seeing where people are and how they're doing? Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it helps to have structures, and it's also something we each just need to carry in our hearts, and any one of us can be the one to initiate the conversation, but it helps to look at the structures. Are they built to help us? I like that idea of going right, who have you talked to this week? Who have you helped this week? You know, yeah.
Well, one of the first things they always say, when you have a big problem, is get in touch with your minister.
Right.
But if Westminster downtown doesn't offer their counseling sessions anymore, that puts it back into the individual churches. And like she says, not every pastor has the skills.
Yeah.
Correct.
So,
But there's lots of resources out there for finding
Right.
mental health counseling. I mean, you know, the first one that comes to my mind is Mount Olivet. So Mount Olivet is Lutheran, yes, but even, you know, the Lutherans have a good system over in South Minneapolis. You know, with counseling, with the counseling center. And so there's other counseling centers out there. It doesn't have to be church related to be you know, a good counseling center.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, just looking around at the NAMI walk, I mean, everybody, all the insurance companies, hospitals were there with their particular programs.
Yes,
And so there's lots of resources.
Well, you
But as
can
long
call-
as long as though that the church becomes, you know, when you say, call your minister, as long as the church, whatever the committee, the deacon, or, you know, just somebody next to you will acknowledge that you're in pain or stress or whatever. Sometimes you just need that acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it's okay to get help. And guess what? We have places we know of. That's almost all we really need to give people, is that we're open to hearing their problem and acknowledging that what they're feeling is right and true, and that they need, that they're crying for help. We can give them that, you know, information so that they can take the next step, and we've got their back.
Yeah.
Amen, amen.
maybe this Christian basis. People are.
I mean, there's other resources and we have a list of resources. But it's just, you know, and that, you know, the whole Christian thing, I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be a behavioral counseling that is not Christian based. That is just, you know.
Maybe it's all kinds of quality, and yeah, you can have Christian based, which maybe lacks some of what you
I mean,
want in a good scientific.
My therapist is Jewish and I love her to death.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I love her to death. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, our spirituality is very different, but you know.
And then so much is just universal. Associate Clinic of Psychology, they've got tons of people there. And when I was looking for a therapist for myself, by that time, my husband had been seeing a psychiatrist there. He was the one who said, you know, this is going to be very tough on you guys. You each need individuals. You both need a marriage counselor besides seeing me for his problems. And that was probably some of the best advice I had. But I just went straight to the people at the desk because they have like, I don't know how many counselors there, more than you can count. Them 30, 40, 50, 60. And I just said, you've seen me, who would you recommend for me?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, they started blah, 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 like, yeah, you should, your marriage counselor should be Barbie, you should get Kathy. And I was like, once I met Kathy, I was like, I wish I'd known her 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But so you can talk to so many different people outside of the church that will give you the support that you need.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.